We are going to be doing an acrylic painting today. Now, if you don't have acrylic paints at home, you can use watercolor. You can also use oil pastels, crayons, colored pencils, anything that blends colors together the same kind of way. So what you're going to need is obviously paint, just the primary colors, white and black, a cup of water and a brush. And then what I like to use is like to use for like a palette or a mixing tray. I just used a piece of cardboard and you can put wax paper, cling wrap or whatever you'd like over it. You can even use just a piece of cardboard, but it makes it a little bit easier to clean after you're done. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna start off and we're gonna start with blending some colors. And so the first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna take red, and I'm gonna make like a little block here of red. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the rainbow of the colors, mixing the colors across the way. Now obviously you need to know what makes orange and what makes green and things like that. But the other thing is also to figure out how to do the blending with the paint. So what I'm going to do is, while my brush is still kind of dirty, really lightly I'm going to scoop up a little bit of yellow, and then I'm going to blend it in here with this. And that's going to give me that really cool, like an orange color. So it's like I'm going down. And then the more yellow I add, the more orange it's going to get. Now, what I want to do is when I want a solid color, so when I want exactly a yellow, I'm going to clean out my brush. And usually wiping it off in a paper towel is really helpful. And then you'll be able to get that solid yellow that you're looking for. Now with yellow, I'm going to mix and I'm going to make a green so I can keep the yellow on my brush. So I'm going to take just a teeny bit of blue, and I'm going to mix it in there. And you'll notice too, like if you don't get the right color right away, you can keep adding. So like I added in a little bit more yellow. So I got my green, and then you can go to solid blue. And then we need to go to purple. And with purple, it's going to be the same kind of thing. I could keep the blue on my brush, or this time I was going to clean it off. And I'm going to mix a little bit of blue and a little bit of red. And I'm going to get my purple. Now the idea is that you're able to blend the colors together so that you can get that vibrant monochromatic scheme here. The next thing we want to do is I want to show you how to make colors go lighter to darker. And so one of the things that you can do is, let's say we'll use red again. So if I start with red, I'm going to start with red smack dab in the middle of my paper here. Now the idea is to make a color darker, you add black. So what I can do is really, if you notice just a small tip of black on here, I'm going to add black really slowly into the red. Otherwise, black can kind of take over, and it can kind of take over your whole entire color, and then all of a sudden you just have red and black. You don't have that kind of variation. So you get to darker here, and then we'd go all the way to black. Now what you can do is on the other side, we're going to lighten it up. So I want to make sure you have a clean brush again, and always dry it off. Usually that's the way to go. We start with red. I'll put red down here, and then I'm going to add just a little bit of white, and then I'm going to start adding in white. A little more white each time. It's going to get lighter and lighter. Now usually to get a pure white, I'd have to clean out my brush, but for this particular method, it doesn't really matter. Okay, so the idea though is that you're able to blend colors from one spectrum to the other. The other thing that we're going to talk about is how to make basic shapes and different things in a picture. So you are going to be asked to make a landscape, which is anything that you see out in nature. So it could be water, trees, sky, mountains, buildings, animals, anything like that. In your picture, you're going to have to make sure that you incorporate at least 3 trees, and you need to have obviously a sky and a ground, and then 1 extra item. So that could be anything from like mountains to a cabin, a waterfall, anything like that you would like to add extra in there. So one of the things that I always like to show is, first of all, people always ask, well, how do you make a tree? Well, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to mix, and you're going to get a green. And so I take a little bit of blue, and this is where the blending pays off. And then it's a little bit of yellow, and I'm going to mix and try to get the color green that I like. Now, same with this. If I want to make my green darker, I'm going to add black. If I want to make it lighter, I add white. So what I'm gonna do is I have my green, and one of the tricks is if you take your paintbrush and you make just kind of like a little spot, we're gonna start with pine trees here. And I'm gonna enlarge it so you can see it. So you start off with the tip of the pine tree, and then your brush, you'll notice they usually have a flat edge on it. Mine, however, does not. But if it has a flat edge, what you can do is you make kind of like a little T, and then you can reload your paint. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna kind of dab back and forth, and you're gonna fill it in. Now you could do the same thing with watercolor paints too. It's gonna be a little bit more transparent. So you'll have to probably do more coats of it or layers. You can do it with colored pencils as well. You just have to do like a different type of texture. Okay, so now that I have my tree, the idea is we want to make them as realistic looking as possible. And trees aren't just one shade of green. Usually they have many, many different shades. So I'm gonna add a little bit of black to my brush, and I'm gonna make a darker green. And now that I have a darker green, I'm gonna go in and just some spots where the shadow would be, and I'm gonna add in some little shadows on the tree. Now up close, it's probably gonna look kind of funny to you. It's gonna look like someone just took and kind of blobbed things all over the place. The one thing is though, is from a distance, it's gonna give you that different variation, so it's gonna look more realistic. Now with your brush, when you get things like this, that's more of like a dry brush. I call it the whiskers, and that usually just means you either need to add more paint, or sometimes people just like that look and then they keep that look on there. Now the next thing you can do is you can add a lighter green. So you'll notice here I just added a little bit of white, and you can add that a little bit lighter. And what that does is adds like the light portion of it. So it'll show like where the light is hitting on the tree. Now the most successful pine trees are the ones when people are doing them and they're not perfectly symmetrical. Like you don't want it to be perfectly symmetrical. You want it to be a little off and things like that. Now if I get this from a distance, it's gonna start looking more like a tree. And then what I could do is I could take my brush, and you can actually make grass. So it looks like it's in the grass. And I'm just making little, like those whiskers again. Okay, and then automatically it's gonna look like it's in the grass. I could add darker value so it looks like it has a shadow. You know, so you can do all kinds of really kind of fun things. But the idea is to get those different values in there. Now, if I'm making a regular tree, obviously a tree is brown, and you don't have the brown out here. So I'm gonna show you how to make brown. Brown is one of the harder colors to make just because it's kind of touchy. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna go into your paints, and you're gonna start with red. And then when your brush is still dirty, if you kind of do a side scoop into your paint, it'll keep your paints cleaner. And I'm gonna add some yellow to make an orange. And then I'm gonna do a little scoop of blue. Now I get this kind of like this mucky color. Well, what you can do is if you add white or black to it, it'll change the color of it. It'll make it lighter. Now this one, it's kind of, I might want a little bit more yellow. Get a little bit more brown. Okay. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this brown, and I'm gonna put a little bit of water on the brush. It's gonna help it move a little bit smoother over the paper. And I'm gonna start with just a line. So that's gonna be like the middle of my tree. And then I'm gonna do a series of Ys. So a Y, a Y. And that's gonna be where my branches are. Now obviously you can take, I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger. You can take and you can make the trunk bigger. Usually what I recommend though is to start a little bit thinner than what you think you're gonna use. And then also you probably will have a smaller brush too, depending on the size of your painting. But you can just add in your brush strokes like that. Then what you're gonna do is if you have a tree that's in the fall or the winter that's lost its leaves, then what you're gonna do is you're gonna add in, preferably with a smaller brush here too, you're gonna add in some shadows, so you can add in like darker sections to the side, so it looks a little bit more realistic. And once again, usually you have a whole bunch of different brushes, but for this practice I just decided to use this one. Okay, so you have a little bit of variation of color. Then what we're gonna do is, if you're gonna do a tree that has leaves on it, obviously, if you have some of this green left, you can use the green, but we're gonna mix and we're gonna make our green leaves. And the best way to make the leaves is just do kind of like little dabbing motions. And then keep in mind, when you're making trees, that one of the things people get caught up on, I think, is they make the tree leaves all around the edges, but they don't have it go over the middle. Well, trees aren't usually bare in the middle. Usually they have, you know, some filling in here. And I also don't make it perfect, because obviously trees usually aren't perfect when they're filled in like that. So maybe some spots are more filled in than others. So kind of like that. Okay, and then the same thing will apply. So if I want to add in, you know, if I want to have in that lighter section, maybe I want this to be a little bit more green. I'm going to add in some more yellow. I could do fall trees, and those, you know, obviously you would make your own colors and the reds and oranges and yellows and stuff like that. But anyway, it would change up, and so it would look kind of like that. And then obviously, like, you could have, you know, grass again, things like that. Okay, now if you're making mountains, mountains are a little bit more tricky, just depending on how you're doing it. Now, one of the things with painting that you always got to keep in mind is you always start with a background first and then you work forward. So obviously, because we're practicing, we're just making these on here. But if I were to actually be making my finished painting, I would start with my sky and my ground first, and then I would add toward me. Because otherwise, if you're trying to do the sky and you've already had your trees and your mountains and everything, you'd have to sit and paint in between all those little spots, and it tends to be really, really hard to do. So I'm going to make a gray. And that's going to be kind of the start of my mountain. And what you can do is, if you have your brush kind of sideways, kind of make it kind of jagged. Mountains are not just a triangle. They actually go in and out. Okay, and then I'm going to kind of pull down. And I'm going to leave kind of some spaces in there. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a lighter color, so maybe a lighter white, and then I'm going to show like where the light would be hitting. So like if I have snow on my mountains, I'd add the snow. And then you also can add in darker sections, so you'd have like the shadow. Once again, this one up close usually doesn't look that great until you see it from a distance, and then it'll be like, hey, that actually looks like mountains. And then so once I have my mountains in there, then you could add in, say you wanted some other type of green in that section. So I could add some yellow here, make a green, and then I could do like bushes or shrubs in front of it, so you wouldn't see the bottom. I could do more trees. So there's a lot of different options of things that you can do. So now I all of a sudden have a tree, and then maybe here I want another tree. Okay, so there's a lot of really fun things that you can do with this, and it's going to actually make it look like a mountain. Some of the other things too is if you're mixing skies and things like that, then obviously you're going to want to blend in colors. When you're doing a background, a sky isn't just one shade of blue. So if I was doing a blue sky on a picture, I could do blue, so in some spots blue, and then I could go in and I would add some spots would be lighter. The ones that look most realistic are the ones that are almost chunky. So if you can see, like, you can see all the variations of color in the sky. So if that was the sky, I don't only have just one shade of blue. I have white, I have dark. If I wanted it to be like more shadowed, I could have like add in a darker blue here. So like all of a sudden like this part's shadowed a little bit. So the nice part about using this paint is you can really change the colors really quickly. And so that's pretty much the point of this particular project. So the goal is to create, if possible, with acrylic paints, an acrylic landscape. And if not, create a landscape with some other type of medium that you have at home or that's available to you, and to incorporate all those different blending techniques into it. And the goal is to make it look as realistic as possible.